Hey guys, tonight we journey into a tale that has been passed down for centuries, one that is filled with power, pride, and lightning itself. Imagine standing in the ancient Greek world, where the air crackles with energy, and the mighty Zeus stands at the center of it all, wielding the thunderbolt that could shatter mountains. You might think of Zeus as a towering figure commanding the sky, but his story starts far humbler, in a world where even the gods had to fight for their place. You're on the edge of this great cosmic struggle, watching as a young Zeus navigates the tumultuous world of gods and titans. He wasn't always the thunder-wielding king of Olympus. No, Zeus had to rise to power, and like all great leaders, his journey was filled with struggle, challenge, and a lot of shouting matches with divine family members. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Zeus wasn't born a god of thunder. In fact, his early days were a bit more humble than you might expect for a guy who later became the king of the gods. He was the son of the mighty Cronus, a titan who was, at the time, one of the most powerful beings in the universe. But there was a little problem with Cronus. You see, Cronus had a prophecy hanging over his head that one of his children would overthrow him. And being the power-hungry titan he was, he decided to do what anyone would do in that situation: swallow his kids whole. Yeah, not exactly the best parenting move. But Zeus, being the clever little god-to-be, wasn't about to go down that easily. He was saved from being eaten by his mother, Rhea, who tricked Cronus by giving him a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes instead of Zeus. Cronus, none the wiser, swallowed the rock and carried on, unaware that his future conqueror had already been born. Historians still argue whether Zeus' early escape was a stroke of luck, divine intervention, or just sheer willpower. Some say Rhea played a huge part in saving him, while others suggest Zeus might have had something to do with outsmarting his father early on. Either way, Zeus wasn't swallowed, and he wasn't about to let Cronus get away with his tyrannical ways. You can feel the tension building in the air as Zeus begins his quest for revenge. After narrowly escaping his father's stomach, Zeus hides in secret, growing stronger with each passing year. His first challenge? To free his swallowed siblings, who, at this point, were just sitting around in Cronus' stomach, probably wondering why they hadn't been fed lunch in a while. Imagine being stuck in your dad's digestive system, powerless and completely ignored, only to have your little brother show up and rescue you. That's the situation Zeus' siblings found themselves in. A bit humiliating, right? Zeus, the youngest of his siblings, wasn't going to let this go on any longer. Armed with his newfound strength and the help of Métis, a Titaness who was his ally, Zeus concocts a plan. He gives Cronus a potion that forces him to regurgitate all of the children he had swallowed, and out they come, one by one, all fully grown, probably a bit cranky, and definitely ready for a showdown. This moment is pivotal. The children of Cronus, Poseidon, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, and Hades, are now free, and together, they form a unified front against their tyrannical father. It's like the ultimate family reunion, but with a lot more lightning and a lot fewer hugs. This scene sets the stage for the epic battle that will shape the future of the gods, a battle that will be known as the Titanomachy. And then, just as you think things are about to calm down, Zeus makes another bold move. He seeks out the Cyclopes, three giant, one-eyed beings who live in the deepest parts of the earth. These Cyclopes have a very particular skill. They can craft incredible weapons, including the famous Thunderbolt that will eventually become Zeus' signature weapon. With the Cyclopes' help, Zeus is armed and ready to take on his father's army of titans. But here's the thing, even with his Thunderbolt, Zeus wasn't exactly invincible. The titans were still a formidable force, and the battle between them would test not only his strength, but his leadership. He'd have to rely on more than just a fancy weapon to win this fight. He needed allies, strategy, and most importantly, he needed his siblings. But how could he convince them to join him in overthrowing their father? Historians still argue whether Zeus' success was purely a result of his strategic thinking, or simply the fact that the gods and titans were, in the end, on different sides of a cosmic battle. Some suggest Zeus was truly a tactical genius, while others believe his destiny was sealed from birth, and he was simply fulfilling his role in the grand design of things. What we do know is that the Titanomachy wasn't just about brawn. It was about Zeus rising as a leader, a king who could unite gods and forces of nature alike. And what's more, his thunderbolt wasn't just a weapon of destruction. It symbolized his authority, his control over the skies, and his ability to bring order to chaos. Pretty impressive for a guy who started out in a stomach, don't you think? The battle between Zeus and the Titans rages on, and you can feel the weight of this celestial struggle. It's not just a battle of strength, it's a test of strategy, of destiny, and of Zeus' ability to bring the gods together. The Titans, led by Cronus, are formidable, but Zeus has something they don't: the will of the gods on his side, and a growing sense of leadership that's starting to catch fire. Remember, he's not alone in this. He has his brothers and sisters backing him up, and with each wave of the fight, they grow more united, more determined. Zeus is a force to be reckoned with, but there's something about the Titans' power that's different. They represent the old world, the primal forces that controlled nature before the gods of Olympus took charge. And Cronus, their leader, is no ordinary Titan. He's the very embodiment of time, making him one of the most powerful beings in the universe. But Zeus has an ace up his sleeve, one that might seem unexpected: Prometheus. Yes, the Titan who would later become known for his wisdom and his bond with humanity. Prometheus, though once an ally of the Titans, chooses to side with Zeus in the Titanomachy, a critical move that weakens the Titans' forces. Prometheus, ever the clever one, has foresight. He knows that Zeus is destined to win this war, and by siding with him, he secures his own place in the future of the gods. The battle intensifies, and Zeus, empowered by his Thunderbolt and the support of his allies, faces off against Cronus. The sky crackles with energy, and the earth trembles beneath their feet. But here's the kicker: Cronus, despite his immense power, is not invulnerable. Time itself, though strong, is not all-powerful. The battle reaches a climax when Zeus hurls his Thunderbolt at Cronus, breaking through the Titan's defenses and shattering the illusion of invincibility that had hung over him for eons. But here's the twist: Zeus doesn't kill Cronus. Instead, he imprisons him in Tartarus, the dark abyss beneath the earth, where the defeated Titans are held for eternity. It's a move that shocks even the gods themselves. After all, if you're going to overthrow a king, you'd think you'd take him out. But Zeus, with his growing wisdom, chooses restraint. It's not about absolute destruction. It's about balance, about restoring order, about ensuring the gods will rise in their rightful place. And in this pivotal moment, something interesting happens. As Zeus stands victorious, thunderbolts crackling in his hands, you realize that his rise to power isn't just about overthrowing his father. It's about redefining the role of a god, of a ruler. It's about using power not for revenge, but for transformation. The gods, once chaos incarnate, will now serve a higher purpose. Historians still debate whether Zeus' restraint was a sign of wisdom or simply a reflection of his growing godly status. Was he showing mercy, or was he simply too powerful to feel the need for further violence? Was his decision to imprison Cronus a calculated move to prevent more conflict, or was it a gesture of control? Either way, this moment marks the beginning of a new era for the gods. No longer will they live in the shadow of the Titans. Zeus is now the undisputed leader, and the gods of Olympus, armed with their newfound power and wisdom, will begin to reshape the world in their image. The war is over, but now the real work begins. Zeus, newly crowned as the king of the gods, faces the immense task of ruling Olympus and overseeing the vast world that stretches below him. It's no small feat, being the god of thunder and lightning. There's more than just power involved. It's about responsibility. And while Zeus is quick to claim his Thunderbolt, he's also quick to realize that his victory is far from complete. As Zeus settles into his role, there's something that's impossible to ignore: the growing presence of his siblings. They all want something from him. Poseidon, his brother, has his eyes set on the seas. Hades, his other brother, desires the realm of the dead. Each god has their domain in mind, and Zeus must decide who gets what. He has already overthrown the Titans, but now he faces a different kind of challenge: managing divine egos, keeping his siblings in check, and ensuring that the power dynamics of the gods are balanced. To settle the issue of the realms, Zeus makes a fateful decision. He doesn't give everyone a piece of land or control over the earth. No, instead, he calls for a grand drawing of lots, a divine lottery, where each god will receive a portion of the world based on chance. It's a smart move. By leaving the division of power to fate, Zeus can avoid potential arguments and ensure that each god gets a domain that suits their strengths and desires. Poseidon, of course, claims the seas, ruling over the oceans with his trident. Hades, with a somber sigh, takes the underworld, where he rules over the dead in a kingdom filled with shadows and darkness. And Zeus finally gets the sky, the thunderbolt forever in his hand, reigning over the heavens and all that lives below. But here's the kicker. While the gods are now assigned their domains, there's still the matter of their relationships. And Zeus, ever the strategist, realizes that divine diplomacy will be just as important as his thunderbolt. He's not just the god of thunder, he's also the god of order and justice. He'll need to keep his siblings in check, maintaining peace among the gods while also keeping them from overstepping their bounds. There's a quirky tidbit here. Some ancient texts suggest that Zeus' decision to split the realms wasn't entirely peaceful. In some versions of the myth, Poseidon and Hades were furious with their assignments, feeling that they deserved more or that they had been cheated. But in typical Zeus fashion, he uses his wisdom and charisma to smooth things over, making sure the gods are content and that the cosmic order remains intact. It's a reminder that ruling isn't just about power, it's about managing relationships, even among gods. Historians still debate whether this division of power among the gods was truly fair. Was it a wise move on Zeus' part to keep the gods divided, or did it set the stage for constant competition and jealousy? Did he truly want peace, or was he simply consolidating his own power and leaving his siblings to fight over the scraps? You sit with these questions for a moment, understanding the complexity of the task Zeus faces. He may have won the war against the Titans, but now he must navigate a different kind of battle, one of control, balance, and diplomacy. But despite these tensions, Zeus has a deep understanding of his role. He's the king of the gods, yes, but he's also the keeper of order. He doesn't just command power, he organizes it. The gods now live under his rule, but each one has their own realm, their own sphere of influence. And while Zeus may hold the sky, he knows that keeping his siblings content and ensuring their cooperation is just as important as wielding his thunderbolt. Now that Zeus has solidified his reign and divided the world among the gods, it's time for him to establish order in Olympus. But order, as Zeus quickly discovers, is not as easy to maintain as one might think. Despite the grand lottery that assigned the realms, the gods are still creatures of ego and desire. They are powerful beings, and their desires do not always align with Zeus's vision for a harmonious universe. The first real challenge comes in the form of Zeus' own romantic entanglements. As king of the gods, he's supposed to be the symbol of justice and order, yet his desires are insatiable. He is attracted to mortal women and goddesses alike, and his romantic affairs become a source of tension within Olympus. His wife, Hera, is not pleased with his infidelities, and soon a dangerous game of divine jealousy begins to unfold. Zeus' affairs lead to complicated relationships with various gods and mortals, and the consequences of his actions ripple throughout the world. Mortals, influenced by his actions, begin to question the integrity of the gods, and Zeus must constantly deal with the fallout from these liaisons. Hera, in particular, is vengeful and often punishes Zeus's lovers and their children. Her rage creates a volatile atmosphere in Olympus, one that Zeus must continuously navigate. Here's a quirky tidbit. One of Zeus's most famous lovers was the mortal woman Alcmene, who, according to myth, bore him the hero Hercules. To seduce her, Zeus disguised himself as her husband, Amphitryon, and she was so fooled by the disguise that she unknowingly slept with him. When Alcmene discovered the truth, Hera's jealousy became so intense that she tried to thwart Heracles' fate, creating numerous challenges for him throughout his life. Despite this, Heracles grew into one of the greatest heroes of Greek mythology, a testament to the chaos and occasional beauty that came from Zeus' affairs. Historians still argue about the nature of Zeus' relationships with mortals and other gods. Some see his affairs as a reflection of divine power, proof that the gods could not be bound by human morals and expectations. Others believe that Zeus' infidelities are a metaphor for the tension between the divine and mortal realms, showcasing the gods' ability to intervene in human lives, often with unintended consequences. Was Zeus' behavior a sign of his unchecked power, or was it a necessary part of his role as ruler of Olympus? The answers remain elusive, as these myths can be interpreted in many ways. In any case, as you think about the complexities of Zeus's relationships, you begin to understand the full extent of his power and the burden it carries. His ability to command thunder and lightning may be unmatched, but his role as king of the gods also requires him to maintain balance and manage relationships among powerful, often temperamental beings. Love, jealousy, vengeance, these emotions, so human in nature, are what shape Zeus' reign and make it more complicated than simply ruling over the heavens. Zeus' story is one of contradictions. He is a god of justice, yet his actions often defy the very concept of fairness. He is the ultimate ruler, but his rule is threatened by the desires and emotions of those around him. And yet, despite the chaos his relationships cause, Zeus manages to maintain his position as king of the gods, a testament to his resilience and power. Zeus's ability to maintain control over Olympus, despite the chaos his affairs generate, is a testament to his formidable power. However, not all of his divine actions come without consequences. As ruler of the gods, Zeus must constantly deal with the complexities of his divine family, including his siblings, children, and other deities who all want a piece of his power. The gods, despite being immortal, are not immune to the petty squabbles that plague human families. Power struggles and rivalries erupt within Olympus, and Zeus must navigate these conflicts carefully to avoid the collapse of his reign. One of the most notable instances of Zeus managing divine discord is the infamous conflict between Athena, his daughter, and Poseidon, his brother. The two gods found themselves at odds over the patronage of Athens, a city that was growing in prominence. Both Athena and Poseidon sought to be named the city's protector, each offering a gift to the people in exchange for their loyalty. Poseidon struck the ground with his trident, causing a spring of water to emerge, but it was salty and undrinkable. Athena, however, offered the olive tree, which provided food, oil, and wood, all invaluable resources. The Athenians, of course, chose Athena's gift, and she became the city's patron goddess. This conflict between Poseidon and Athena was a perfect example of the types of rivalries Zeus had to mediate. As the king of the gods, he could not allow one sibling to triumph over another, as it would upset the balance of power within Olympus. Yet, despite his best efforts to remain neutral, the gods' egos often made it difficult for Zeus to maintain peace. Interestingly, there's a peculiar tidbit about Zeus' role in this situation. Some versions of the myth suggest that, while he had the final say in Athens' patronage, Zeus favored Poseidon's gift over Athena's. Despite this, he had to respect the people's decision, as they ultimately chose the olive tree over the salty spring. This reflects Zeus's ongoing struggle to maintain control without outright dictating the actions of the gods or mortals. Historians still debate whether Zeus was truly impartial in this conflict, or if his support of Poseidon was a strategic move to maintain balance within the pantheon. Some argue that Zeus' neutrality in matters like these was a deliberate attempt to foster harmony, while others see it as a manifestation of his political acumen. Either way, the conflict over Athens highlights the delicate balance Zeus had to maintain as ruler of the gods. Another significant aspect of Zeus's reign was his constant involvement in mortal affairs. Despite being the king of the gods, Zeus could not resist meddling in the lives of mortals. His interactions with human beings were often complex, and his involvement in mortal conflicts often had far-reaching consequences. Whether it was granting favors, punishing wrongdoers, or taking on human disguises to pursue his own desires, Zeus's influence over mortal life was undeniable. Perhaps the most famous of Zeus's mortal affairs was his relationship with the mortal woman Alcmene, who bore the hero Hercules. To seduce her, Zeus disguised himself as her husband, Amphitryon, and she was so fooled by the disguise that she unknowingly slept with him. This affair resulted in the birth of Heracles, a hero who would go on to complete the 12 labors and become one of the most beloved figures in Greek mythology. However, Zeus's infidelity led to a great deal of strife in Olympus, as Hera, his wife, was furious with the affair and took out her wrath on Alcmene and her son. Zeus's involvement with mortals was often marked by these complex relationships, where his divine power collided with the mortal world. These affairs often had consequences that extended far beyond the individuals involved, affecting the gods, their families, and the fate of entire cities. Historians still question why Zeus was so drawn to mortal women despite his marriage to Hera. Was it a sign of divine arrogance, or did Zeus see mortals as more accessible, free from the rigid expectations of Olympus? Some scholars argue that Zeus's infidelity was a reflection of his human-like nature, highlighting the god's flaws and desires. Others believe that Zeus's involvement with mortals was a way to ensure that divine bloodlines would persist in the mortal realm. Zeus's legacy is one of complexity and contradiction. He was a god of immense power, yet his actions often reflected the weaknesses of both gods and mortals. His reign was marked by divine squabbles, human desires, and a constant balancing act between justice and chaos. Despite these challenges, Zeus remained the king of the gods, a figure who symbolized both divine authority and the messy, unpredictable nature of life itself. As you settle deeper into the story, you might be wondering, why does Zeus get away with all his behavior? After all, he's not exactly the poster child for a stable and well-behaved deity. But in Greek mythology, that's part of his charm. Zeus's very complexity as a god is what makes him such a powerful symbol. He is both the epitome of divine power and deeply flawed in ways that make him, paradoxically, more human. One of Zeus's most prominent traits is his ability to control fate. As king of the gods, he had the power to decide the destinies of gods and mortals alike. But while Zeus's role as fate's master seems absolute, the truth is a bit murkier. Even Zeus, despite his mighty thunderbolt and towering presence, had limits. There were moments in Greek myth where his control over fate wasn't so clear-cut, where the divine will of the gods clashed with their human counterparts. Take, for instance, the famous story of the Trojan War. Zeus, as the orchestrator of the gods' actions, played a key role in the conflict. But despite his position as the most powerful god, he couldn't prevent the war from happening. In fact, he didn't even fully control the gods' involvement in the conflict. Athena, Hera, and Aphrodite were actively involved in supporting different sides of the war, while other gods like Apollo and Poseidon fought for different causes. In the end, Zeus couldn't control the actions of the gods, and the war became an uncontrollable force, playing out its destructive course. Historians still argue whether Zeus was a god of order or chaos. On the one hand, he is the king of the gods and is often portrayed as upholding justice and order in the divine world. On the other hand, his many affairs, the chaos he stirs in the lives of mortals, and his failure to fully control his family paint him as a less than perfect figure. Some scholars suggest that Zeus's reign reflects the duality of human nature, a divine king who tries to balance order and chaos but often finds himself lost between the two. As we turn our attention back to the mortal realm, Zeus's complex relationships with his children highlight another layer of his character. Some of his most famous offspring, Heracles, Athena, Apollo, and Artemis, are figures who embody his power in one way or another. But these children are also often in conflict with Zeus. For example, Heracles' famous 12 labors are a direct consequence of Zeus's earlier mistake involving Hera. Similarly, Athena's emergence as a powerful and independent goddess was not something Zeus planned for. Instead of reigning with control, Zeus found himself navigating a series of challenges that arose from his relationships with his own offspring. One of Zeus's most strikingly human qualities is his tendency to make rash decisions, especially when it comes to his relationships. His many lovers and children were a constant source of tension in Olympus. He had an especially complicated relationship with his wife, Hera. Despite their marriage, Zeus continued to have numerous affairs with mortal women, often using deceit and disguises to carry out his plans. Hera's wrath was legendary, and she frequently took out her anger on Zeus's lovers or their children. This constant back and forth between Zeus and Hera was one of the key features of Greek mythology, and it served as an enduring symbol of the tensions between divine authority and human-like emotions. Historians still debate whether Zeus's affairs were a reflection of his divine arrogance or a representation of his complex relationship with mortals. Did Zeus view mortals as beings to be used and discarded, or was he simply responding to the same passions and desires that humans experience? Some scholars argue that Zeus's many relationships were a way for him to connect with humanity on a deeper level, while others believe that they reflect a more selfish aspect of his character, an inability to control his desires, even as the king of the gods. Zeus's role as a father and husband also mirrors the roles of fathers and husbands in Greek society. He is often portrayed as the head of the family, the one who has the final say in important matters. However, Zeus's relationships with his children and wife were far from ideal, often filled with tension and drama. Despite his great power, Zeus was unable to create the perfect family dynamic. This reflects the larger theme in Greek mythology. Gods may be powerful, but they are also flawed, subject to the same vices and conflicts that humans face. In the end, Zeus's legacy is one of complexity, marked by both triumph and tragedy. He remains the king of the gods, revered for his power and influence, but also known for the chaos he creates through his actions. Zeus's rule over Olympus, like his interactions with mortals, was never simple or straightforward. His journey as a god reflects the tension between control and chaos, between order and disorder, a reminder that even the most powerful figures have their flaws. As the story unfolds, you find yourself reflecting on Zeus's Thunderbolt, perhaps the most iconic symbol of his power. This weapon, forged by the Cyclopes, is the ultimate manifestation of divine force. It's not just a tool for destruction, it's a mark of authority, an instrument that allows Zeus to command the heavens and the earth. But here's the thing, his thunderbolt isn't always the answer, and that's a theme that runs through the myths. Take, for example, the tale of the Titanomachy, the great battle between the Olympian gods and the Titans. Zeus's thunderbolt was his signature weapon in this war, but it wasn't the only weapon at his disposal. In fact, Zeus's victory wasn't guaranteed by the thunderbolt alone. He had the help of his siblings, Poseidon and Hades, and the powerful weapons of the Cyclopes. The thunderbolt was just one part of a much larger strategy. This raises a question. How much did Zeus's power actually depend on his thunderbolt, and how much was it tied to his relationships with other gods? Historians still argue whether Zeus was truly the most powerful god on his own, or whether he relied on the strength of alliances and his ability to strategize. Was the thunderbolt a symbol of his innate power, or was it a crutch, something that helped him assert dominance in a world filled with other powerful gods? Another curious aspect of the thunderbolt is its role in Zeus's relationships with mortals. The weapon is often used as a form of punishment, a way for Zeus to assert his authority over those who defy him. In many myths, Zeus hurls his thunderbolt at mortals who anger him, instantly killing them or punishing them in some other way. This use of the thunderbolt is a symbol of the god's absolute power, but it also raises questions about justice and fairness. The gods were not always just, and Zeus's use of the thunderbolt sometimes seemed arbitrary. For example, in the story of Niobe, the queen who boasted that she was superior to Leto, Zeus struck down her children with his thunderbolt as a punishment for her arrogance. But was this punishment fair? Niobe's actions may have been disrespectful, but was the death of her children really just? Zeus's use of the thunderbolt in this case seems to reflect the darker side of divine power, how easily it could be wielded against those who dared to challenge the gods. Historians have long debated the symbolism of Zeus's thunderbolt in this context. Some view it as a necessary tool for maintaining order in the world, a reminder of the god's ultimate authority. Others see it as a more tragic symbol, representing the harshness and unpredictability of divine rule. Either way, it's clear that the thunderbolt played a central role in Zeus's identity as the king of the gods. Interestingly, the thunderbolt's association with lightning also connects Zeus to the natural world. Lightning was a powerful force in ancient Greece, feared and revered for its destructive potential. By wielding the thunderbolt, Zeus claimed dominion over this natural phenomenon. In a sense, the thunderbolt is a representation of Zeus's connection to the forces of nature, a reminder that even the gods cannot escape the unpredictable power of the elements. But even Zeus's thunderbolt couldn't solve every problem. When the Titans were overthrown, the gods' victory didn't immediately result in peace. The world was still chaotic, and the gods themselves were far from perfect. Zeus's rule, despite his thunderbolt and the might of Olympus, was still challenged by the flaws of his family and the tensions between gods and mortals. The thunderbolt, for all its power, couldn't always bring resolution. In the end, Zeus's thunderbolt is as much a symbol of his limitations as it is of his power. It is a reminder that even the mightiest of gods have their struggles, that power can be both a gift and a burden. And as we've seen time and again in Greek mythology, even the greatest gods must contend with the same imperfections that afflict mortals. As you imagine the thunderbolt crackling in the sky, you realize that Zeus's story is not just about a god wielding power, it's about the complexity of that power. The thunderbolt is not just a tool of destruction, it is a symbol of the delicate balance between order and chaos, between power and responsibility. Zeus's reign, marked by both triumph and tragedy, is defined by this tension, and the thunderbolt is the ultimate expression of that complexity. As the thunderbolt rests in your mind, Zeus's reign begins to take shape in a broader, more intricate way. The thunderbolt, powerful as it is only a piece of the larger puzzle of his leadership. As the king of the gods, Zeus has to juggle the demands of the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. It's a role that requires diplomacy, wisdom, and at times a heavy hand. Zeus's leadership wasn't just about commanding the skies, it was about maintaining order in a world that constantly teetered on the edge of chaos. Think about it, the gods were hardly an easy bunch to rule. They had their own egos, their own desires, and their own issues with one another. And then there were mortals who seemed to think they could get away with anything, especially when they were under the influence of certain gods. This delicate balance of power required Zeus to constantly use his wits as much as his thunderbolt. Here's where things get interesting. How did Zeus navigate all these complex relationships? Was he a good ruler, or was he just the best of a flawed bunch? Some scholars argue that Zeus's power wasn't just physical but political. He knew when to use force, with his thunderbolt, of course, and when to use subtlety and persuasion. This is why Zeus was often portrayed as a god who could charm, deceive, or threaten his way out of nearly any situation. His ability to shift between force and diplomacy made him a formidable leader, but also one that wasn't always straightforward. One curious example of Zeus's political savvy comes from the story of the Titan Prometheus. Prometheus, a Titan known for his intellect and compassion for humanity, defied Zeus by stealing fire from the gods and giving it to mankind. This act of rebellion didn't sit well with Zeus. But instead of immediately striking down Prometheus with his thunderbolt, Zeus chose a different route. He bound Prometheus to a rock, where an eagle would eat his liver daily for eternity. The punishment was long, drawn out, and symbolic, showing both Zeus's power and his ability to think beyond a simple show of force. Historians still debate whether Zeus's punishment of Prometheus was an example of divine justice, or whether it revealed Zeus's insecurities. Did Prometheus's act of kindness expose a vulnerability in Zeus's rule, or was it just a matter of upholding order and discipline? Some scholars argue that Zeus's punishment of Prometheus reflects his need to assert his authority, while others see it as a more symbolic act of keeping the natural and divine orders in check. Another important element of Zeus's rule was his relationships with other gods. He may have been the king of Olympus, but he wasn't exactly the undisputed ruler. His relationship with his siblings, especially Hades and Poseidon, was fraught with tension. When the three brothers drew lots to divide the world, Zeus took the sky, Poseidon took the sea, and Hades got the underworld. But these divisions didn't always keep things peaceful. There were plenty of instances where Zeus had to use his authority to mediate conflicts between his brothers, and the gods' occasional bickering was a constant backdrop to Zeus's rule. In fact, Zeus's constant role as mediator is one of the most interesting aspects of his leadership. He had to balance not only the power of his fellow gods, but also the power dynamics between the gods and mortals. For example, when the mortal hero Heracles was tasked with completing his 12 labors, Zeus's intervention was often necessary. Whether it was sending him help or smoothing over a conflict with other gods, Zeus's ability to intervene in mortal affairs kept the world from spiraling into chaos. His control over the affairs of mortals was as much a part of his reign as his control over the gods. But with all this power came a set of challenges. It's one thing to rule a world where you can summon storms and strike down enemies with a single bolt of lightning, but it's another thing to maintain peace and order in a pantheon full of egos. Zeus had to constantly deal with divine jealousy, rivalries, and pride. The gods were hardly paragons of virtue, and Zeus's attempts to keep the peace often resulted in some very creative solutions. A perfect example of Zeus's skill in diplomacy and intervention comes from the myth of the Trojan War. The gods were divided over which side to support, with some favoring the Trojans and others siding with the Greeks. Zeus, in his usual role as mediator, had to carefully navigate the godly factions to ensure that the war didn't spill over into divine conflict. In the end, he largely remained a bystander, but his ability to manipulate events and steer the gods toward neutrality proved just how adept he was at maintaining the balance of power. Historians still debate the extent of Zeus's influence in the Trojan War. Some argue that his neutrality was a form of passive leadership, allowing the mortals to fight their war, while Zeus kept the gods from interfering too much. Others suggest that Zeus's actions were more subtle, working behind the scenes to shape the outcome of the war without overtly involving himself. As you sit and think about Zeus's reign, you realize that the Thunderbolt, while iconic, was only one tool in his leadership arsenal. Zeus was more than just a god who ruled with power. He was a god who ruled with intellect, diplomacy, and the ability to keep a volatile world in check. His Thunderbolt was his symbol, but his true power lay in his ability to navigate the complex relationships around him, whether they were between gods, mortals, or the forces of nature. And in the end, that's what makes Zeus such an enduring figure in Greek mythology. He wasn't just a king who ruled from a throne. He was a king who understood that ruling wasn't just about wielding a weapon. It was about balancing power, protecting his people, and navigating the intricate web of relationships that shaped the divine world. As the years pass and Zeus's reign continues, it's clear that his Thunderbolt, despite being his most famous weapon, wasn't the only thing that defined him. The Thunderbolt, as mighty as it was a symbol, an embodiment of Zeus's power over the sky, the storms, and the very forces of nature. But it was also a constant reminder of something else, Zeus's temper, which, as you can imagine, wasn't always the easiest to deal with. You see, Zeus wasn't just the god who wielded lightning bolts for punishment. He was also the god who had to keep his anger in check. After all, the gods around him were no saints, and it was often the case that Zeus would have to step in to manage conflicts, not only between mortals but among the gods themselves. This often meant making difficult decisions that left some gods disgruntled and others wanting more. The thing about Zeus's temper was that it wasn't always a bad thing. In many myths, his quick reactions and divine wrath were justified. When someone or something threatened the order of the universe, Zeus's thunderbolt was a fitting response. But when Zeus was angry with a god or a mortal, it could lead to some serious consequences, as many of his myths show. And you can imagine that living in a world where the king of the gods could send a lightning bolt at any given moment must have been a little nerve-wracking. But here's the thing about Zeus. He also had a way of tempering his wrath, a way of balancing his immense power with a sense of fairness. When a mortal or a god was wronged, Zeus didn't always resort to punishment right away. Instead, he would often take a step back and consider what would be the most just action to take. The balance between his desire for justice and his tendency to unleash wrath is one of the most interesting aspects of his character. One example of this balance comes from the myth of the hero Perseus. Perseus, a mortal, was tasked with slaying the Gorgon Medusa, a terrifying monster whose gaze could turn people to stone. Perseus, with the help of the gods, was able to accomplish this feat, but when Perseus returned, he needed to use Medusa's head to defeat a tyrant named Polydectes, who had been tormenting his mother. Zeus didn't just watch from afar. He intervened, ensuring that Perseus was able to complete his task without falling into the trap of revenge or bloodlust. What's striking about this myth is that it demonstrates Zeus's ability to step in when necessary, guiding mortals to make the right choices, even when those choices were difficult. It's as if Zeus wasn't just the ruler of the gods, he was also a protector of order and fairness in the world. And that sense of balance, between rage and justice, power and restraint, was what truly made Zeus an effective leader, despite his occasional fits of anger. Historians still argue about how the Greeks viewed Zeus's role in mortal lives. Did they see him as a benevolent god who sought to guide them, or as a capricious ruler who could strike down anyone at any time? Some scholars suggest that Zeus's behavior in myths reflects a more nuanced view of divine authority, where gods acted not out of petty vengeance but out of a desire to maintain cosmic balance. Others see Zeus's temper as a symbol of the unpredictable nature of life itself, where the gods, like mortals, could be influenced by their emotions, and that sometimes those emotions led to chaotic outcomes. But the fact remains that Zeus's story is about more than just the thunderbolt. It's about a god who learned how to balance his vast power with a sense of responsibility. Yes, he could throw thunderbolts with the best of them, but he also knew when to wield his power carefully and when to let mortal actions play out on their own. This is the heart of Zeus's leadership, his ability to reign with both force and wisdom, to inspire fear when necessary and to offer guidance when needed. Another example of Zeus's complex nature comes from the myth of the Trojan War. During the war, the gods were divided, each taking sides between the Greeks and the Trojans. Zeus, however, stayed neutral for most of the conflict. Instead of directly intervening, he watched as the war unfolded, allowing the mortals to fight their battle while subtly influencing events from behind the scenes. It wasn't until much later in the war that Zeus finally made his move, but by then, the conflict had already taken its toll on the mortals involved. Zeus's decision to stay neutral during the Trojan War is often seen as a reflection of his wisdom and his understanding of the bigger picture. While the gods quarreled and took sides, Zeus knew that sometimes the best course of action was to allow mortals to make their own decisions, even if it meant suffering. In this sense, Zeus wasn't just a god of thunder. He was a god who understood the complexities of fate, war, and justice. As you reflect on Zeus's reign, it becomes clear that he wasn't just a king of the gods because he could wield a thunderbolt. He was king because he understood how to balance power with fairness, anger with justice, and leadership with wisdom. His thunderbolt was a symbol of his authority, but it was his ability to control and direct that power that made him the ruler of Olympus. As the reign of Zeus continued, the thunderbolt remained his most powerful tool, but it wasn't the only weapon in his arsenal. The myth of Zeus's thunderbolt was as much about control as it was about destruction. While the thunderbolt could bring about sudden, violent retribution, it also symbolized Zeus's ability to control the elements, the very forces of nature that shaped the world. This dual nature of the thunderbolt is what made it such a compelling symbol of his power and authority. But as we know, power often comes with its own set of challenges. With great power comes great responsibility, and in Zeus's case, great difficulty in managing the other gods who, despite their reverence for him, often found themselves at odds with each other and with him. In many ways, the thunderbolt was a symbol of his need to maintain order in a chaotic world, one where gods and mortals alike constantly tested the boundaries of what was allowed. A perfect example of this comes from the myth of the Gigantomachy, the battle between the Olympian gods and the giants. When the giants, who were led by the powerful Alcyoneus, began to challenge the gods for control of the universe, Zeus knew he had to act quickly. His thunderbolt became the ultimate weapon in this war, wielded not just to defeat the giants but to restore the balance of power in the cosmos. The very act of using his thunderbolt to protect the gods and maintain order was a clear demonstration of Zeus's authority. What's fascinating about this myth is that it shows how Zeus's power wasn't just a force of destruction. It was a force of preservation, a means of keeping the natural order intact. The thunderbolt was his instrument of justice, and it was used not just to punish but to protect. This was a recurring theme throughout his reign. Zeus wielded his power not for personal gain, but to ensure the stability of the cosmos. Here's where it gets interesting. Historians still debate the true meaning of the Gigantomachy. Was it a literal battle between gods and giants, or was it a metaphor for the ongoing struggles between the gods and the forces of chaos and disorder? Some scholars argue that the giants represent the forces of nature that were constantly trying to break free from divine control, while others see them as symbols of the challenges that the gods faced in maintaining their power. Regardless of the interpretation, what's clear is that Zeus's thunderbolt was the key to preserving order, both in the divine realm and in the mortal world. In a way, the Gigantomachy and the use of Zeus's thunderbolt speak to the ongoing struggle between order and chaos, a theme that runs throughout Greek mythology. The gods, like Zeus, were tasked with maintaining order, but they were constantly challenged by forces that sought to disrupt that order. The thunderbolt was the tool that allowed Zeus to assert his authority and protect the world from those who sought to tear it apart. Another interesting aspect of Zeus's thunderbolt is its connection to his relationships with other gods. While Zeus was the king of the gods, he wasn't always the most beloved. His relationships with other gods were often complicated, and his thunderbolt was a symbol of both his dominance and his distance from the other gods. He wasn't always a figure of warmth and camaraderie. His power was often seen as a reminder of his isolation from the rest of the pantheon. This is particularly evident in his relationship with his siblings, such as Hades and Poseidon. While Zeus was the ruler of the heavens, Poseidon ruled the seas, and Hades ruled the underworld. The three brothers were powerful in their own right, but Zeus's thunderbolt was the tool that allowed him to assert his dominance over them. The thunderbolt was not just a symbol of his authority. It was a reminder that, in the world of the gods, power was the ultimate currency. Historians still argue about the dynamics between the three brothers. Were they equals, or was Zeus truly the supreme god in every sense of the word? Some scholars suggest that Zeus's reign was the result of his ability to outmaneuver his brothers, using both diplomacy and force to secure his position as the leader of the gods. Others argue that Zeus's power was more natural. He was simply the god best suited to rule, and his thunderbolt was a reflection of that. As you consider Zeus's reign and his use of the thunderbolt, it becomes clear that his power was not just about physical strength. It was about leadership, authority, and the ability to maintain order in a world that was constantly on the brink of chaos. The thunderbolt, in many ways, was the symbol of this power, and it was through the wielding of this weapon that Zeus was able to maintain his place as the ruler of the gods. But the thunderbolt was also a reminder of Zeus's humanity, or rather, his divine flaws. The power of the thunderbolt came with consequences. Just as Zeus used his thunderbolt to preserve order, he also used it to punish those who crossed him. It was a tool of retribution, but also of mercy, depending on how it was wielded. It was a weapon that could restore balance, but it could also tear the world apart. And that, perhaps, is the true essence of Zeus's thunderbolt. It was both a tool of justice and a weapon of destruction, a symbol of the balance he sought to maintain in the cosmos. His reign was defined not just by his ability to wield this power, but by his understanding of when to use it and when to hold back. You begin to realize that Zeus's thunderbolt isn't just a symbol of his divine authority. It's also a representation of the tensions within the Greek pantheon. The gods, despite their immense power, were often embroiled in conflicts and disputes, and the thunderbolt served as a constant reminder of Zeus's role as the ultimate enforcer of order. It was a weapon that could bring swift justice, but it could also create fear and uncertainty. One of the most famous moments when Zeus's thunderbolt made its mark was during the Titanomachy, the great war between the Titans and the Olympian gods. As the leader of the Olympians, Zeus used his thunderbolt to strike down the Titans, securing his place as the ruler of the heavens. The Titans, led by Cronus, had once ruled the world, but their reign was overthrown by Zeus and his siblings. The thunderbolt, in this context, was not just a weapon, it was a symbol of the rise of a new order, a new generation of gods who would reshape the world. In the aftermath of the Titanomachy, Zeus divided the world with his brothers, Poseidon and Hades, each taking control of a different realm. Zeus claimed the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades the underworld. This division of power was an acknowledgement of the immense forces each god represented, but it also highlighted the delicate balance that Zeus had to maintain. He had to be vigilant, ensuring that the other gods did not overstep their boundaries or challenge his authority. The thunderbolt, however, was not a tool that Zeus could rely on endlessly. It was a weapon that required careful handling, for it could easily be seen as a symbol of tyranny if used too frequently. This is where Zeus's wisdom came into play. He knew when to use the thunderbolt, but he also understood the importance of diplomacy and negotiation. After all, the gods, like any powerful group, had their own interests, and Zeus had to navigate those interests carefully to maintain his position as the supreme ruler. An interesting facet of Zeus's reign is his relationship with mortal beings. While the gods were largely detached from human affairs, Zeus was often depicted as intervening in mortal lives. He wasn't just a god of the heavens, he was a god of justice, a protector of hospitality, and a figure who occasionally took on mortal forms to engage with the world below. This interaction between the divine and the mortal realms was a defining feature of Zeus's character. Historians still debate the nature of Zeus's involvement with mortals. Was he a benevolent god who genuinely cared for humanity, or was he a more self-serving deity who used mortals as pawns in his grand scheme of things? Some myths portray Zeus as a protector of human life, such as when he saved the hero Heracles from danger. Other stories, however, show him in a more manipulative light, such as when he seduced mortal women or took revenge on mortals who angered him. This duality in Zeus's character has made him one of the most complex figures in Greek mythology. The thunderbolt, in this context, becomes more than just a symbol of power. It is also a representation of the complexities of Zeus's reign, a reign that was not just defined by force, but also by his ability to balance the needs of the gods and the mortals. It's a reminder that power, no matter how great, must always be tempered by wisdom, empathy, and foresight. As you reflect on Zeus's use of his thunderbolt, you begin to understand the broader implications of his power. It wasn't just about wielding a weapon, it was about using that weapon to maintain balance and order. Zeus's thunderbolt was a tool of divine justice, but it was also a tool of restraint. He knew that, like any ruler, he had to exercise caution. Too much power, too much force could lead to chaos. The thunderbolt, then, wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol of the careful, measured rule that Zeus sought to establish. It's also worth noting that the thunderbolt was not just a weapon of destruction, it was a tool for creation. In some myths, Zeus used his thunderbolt to create new landscapes, new mountains, and even new gods. It was a weapon of transformation, capable of reshaping the world in ways that no other force could. This creative aspect of Zeus's thunderbolt highlights the dual nature of his reign. He was not just a god of punishment and vengeance, but also a god of creation and renewal. As you consider these aspects of Zeus's character, you realize that his thunderbolt was not just a tool of power, it was a reflection of his complex and multifaceted nature. The thunderbolt symbolized both his ability to maintain order and his capacity for destruction, but it also represented his ability to create and shape the world. Zeus, as a god, was not one-dimensional. His reign was defined by the balance between these opposing forces, creation and destruction, justice and vengeance, authority and empathy. As the thunderbolt continues to define Zeus's reign, you can't help but notice how often it serves as both a blessing and a curse. While the thunderbolt was undoubtedly a symbol of Zeus's overwhelming power, it was also the source of much of his internal conflict. The thunderbolt, when wielded in anger or haste, could be a force of devastation, but when used wisely, it could be a symbol of justice, protection, and the very fabric of divine order. It's important to remember that the gods, including Zeus, were not all powerful beings without limitations. Their powers were often contingent upon balance and harmony, and Zeus was no exception. The thunderbolt was a tool that could be used to defend and protect the world, but it was also a tool that could easily upset that delicate balance. Take, for example, the myth of the Trojan War. While Zeus's involvement in the conflict was not direct, his thunderbolt played a significant role in the final moments of the war. As the Greeks and Trojans clashed, the gods intervened, sometimes on opposing sides. Zeus, torn between the conflicting desires of his fellow gods, was forced to make difficult decisions, using his thunderbolt to both aid and punish those involved in the conflict. The thunderbolt in this myth wasn't just a weapon, it was a tool of divine intervention, used to guide the fate of mortals and immortals alike. But even in his wisdom, Zeus was not without fault. His decision to allow the Trojan War to unfold, despite his ability to intervene, speaks to the complexities of his character. The thunderbolt, though powerful, was not a tool he used recklessly. He understood the consequences of his actions, and sometimes, in his quest to maintain balance, he allowed events to unfold in ways that would eventually lead to greater suffering. Historians still argue whether Zeus's role in the Trojan War was one of divine indifference or strategic restraint. Did Zeus, as the ruler of the gods, simply allow the events to unfold as they would, or did he manipulate the war's outcome for a greater purpose? Some believe that Zeus's ultimate goal was to maintain balance in the cosmos, while others suggest that he was merely using his thunderbolt to assert his authority over the other gods and mortals. This ambiguity in Zeus's character highlights the complexity of his reign and the nuanced role of his thunderbolt in shaping the fate of the world. In some ways, Zeus's thunderbolt can be seen as a reflection of the human condition. It is a tool of both creation and destruction, a symbol of the power to shape the world, but also of the dangers of unchecked power. Just as mortals must learn to wield their own power with care and responsibility, so too must the gods. The thunderbolt, in this sense, is a reminder of the importance of balance and self-restraint, even for the most powerful beings in the universe. As you reflect on the complexities of Zeus's thunderbolt, you realize that it is not just a symbol of power, it is a symbol of the choices we make. Every time Zeus raises his thunderbolt, he must choose whether to use it in the service of justice or vengeance, to create or to destroy. And in those moments, his decision reverberates across the world, shaping the fate of gods and mortals alike. The story of the thunderbolt is, in many ways, a story of consequence. It is a story of power, but also of the responsibility that comes with it. Zeus's thunderbolt was not just a weapon, it was a tool of transformation, capable of altering the course of history. Whether it was used to bring justice, restore order, or punish those who dared defy the gods, the thunderbolt left its mark on the world. And perhaps, in the end, that is the most enduring legacy of Zeus's thunderbolt, its ability to shape the world, for better or for worse, with just one strike. Now, let's return to Zeus's thunderbolt one last time, before we conclude this journey through myth and power. The thunderbolt, so closely tied to his authority, wasn't merely a tool for smiting. It was, in many ways, his signature, a symbol of his divine will. While other gods had their domains, Poseidon with the sea, Hades with the underworld, Athena with wisdom, Zeus's thunderbolt was not just a weapon, it was his expression of dominion over all realms. You might think of the thunderbolt as just an object, a simple weapon of destruction, but it was much more than that. It was the embodiment of his control, not only over the heavens, but over the mortal and divine realms alike. The moment Zeus raised his thunderbolt, the air around him would crackle with the energy of impending change. Mortals and gods alike would stop in their tracks, feeling the weight of his power in the very atmosphere. But there's something fascinating here. The myth of Zeus and his thunderbolt isn't just about the god's might. It's also about the consequences of that might. The thunderbolt, though a divine instrument of power, came with its own limitations. The gods weren't omnipotent in the sense that their actions were free of consequence. Every time Zeus raised his thunderbolt, there was a ripple effect, something changed in the world, something that could never be undone. Consider, for example, the story of Zeus and Hera. Their marriage, though central to the divine order, was marred by infidelities, jealousy, and power struggles. Yet, Despite the tumult of their relationship, Zeus never once faltered in his role as the king of gods. He used his thunderbolt to establish his will, yet it couldn't protect him from the inevitable fallout of his actions, his own familial strife. In fact, his thunderbolt, in many ways, became a symbol of both his authority and the isolation that came with it. It wasn't just a weapon for others, it was also a shield he used to distance himself from the complexities of his divine existence. And here's the twist. Zeus, though a master of the heavens, wasn't immune to the vulnerability that came with being a ruler. His thunderbolt, while a tool of power, couldn't grant him the inner peace or familial harmony he may have sought. This paradox, the king of the gods wielding the ultimate symbol of authority while trapped in the struggles of his own making, is what makes Zeus such a compelling character in Greek mythology. His thunderbolt is a tool of creation and destruction, yes, but also of conflict, both internal and external. Historians often debate whether Zeus's thunderbolt was a symbol of divine justice or divine tyranny. Was it an instrument of the gods to enforce order, or was it an extension of Zeus's need to assert his dominance over his peers and the mortals beneath him? Some argue that Zeus, in wielding his thunderbolt, was ensuring balance, making sure the mortal world aligned with the divine order. Others suggest that his thunderbolt was a way of asserting his personal will, proving he was, above all else, the ruler of all. Regardless of how it's interpreted, the thunderbolt has remained an indelible symbol of Zeus's reign, echoing throughout mythology as a reminder of the delicate balance between power and its consequences. The divine right to rule, symbolized by the thunderbolt, came at a great personal cost to Zeus, and perhaps that's what makes his reign all the more poignant. He was both the ruler and the ruled, wielding the power of the heavens yet subject to the very forces of fate that he sought to control. Now, as the story of Zeus's thunderbolt comes to a close, you might find yourself reflecting on the nature of power itself. Zeus's thunderbolt, like all symbols of power, was both a tool for creation and a catalyst for destruction. It shaped the world and defined the very fabric of the divine realm, but it also carried with it the weight of responsibility. It's a reminder that power, in any form, is not just about domination. It's about balance, consequence, and the constant tension between control and chaos. As the final echoes of Zeus's thunderbolt fade, you are left with the realization that, even in mythology, the greatest powers come with the most complicated legacies. Zeus, for all his strength, was bound by the very forces he sought to command. And in that complexity lies the timeless beauty of myth. It is a story of gods and mortals, of power and vulnerability, of creation and destruction. And now, as the last embers of the thunderbolt fade into the night, we can begin to wrap up our journey through Zeus's world, his reign, his power, and ultimately, the enduring legacy of his thunderbolt. In truth, the thunderbolt wasn't just a weapon. It was a way for Zeus to mark his place in the cosmos, to remind both gods and mortals that he was the force that governed the heavens. But much like the gods themselves, this mark was never permanent. Power ebbs and flows, and every reign eventually ends. As you sit there, the weight of these ancient myths beginning to settle into your thoughts, take a moment to reflect on the paradoxes at the heart of Zeus's thunderbolt. A tool of immense strength, yet fraught with consequences, it spoke not only of Zeus's power but also of his isolation. It couldn't shield him from his own flaws or prevent the inevitable conflicts within his family. In this, Zeus's thunderbolt becomes a symbol of the complexity of leadership itself. It's not just about the power you wield, it's about the costs, the personal sacrifices, and the complexities that come with holding that power. And so, the story of Zeus's thunderbolt fades into the silence of the night, leaving behind only the questions that have followed humanity since the dawn of civilization. What does it mean to hold power? What responsibility comes with it? And how do you balance the weight of your own will with the needs and desires of those around you? These are questions that have echoed through the ages, from the gods of Olympus to the leaders of today. But for now, as you drift off to sleep, remember this: the thunderbolt may be gone, but its legacy lives on. The stories of gods and mortals, of creation and destruction, continue to weave their way through our lives. They remind us that power is not just about force, it's about understanding, humility, and the ever-present balance between strength and vulnerability. As you sink deeper into sleep, let these thoughts fade into the quiet of the night, like the last rumble of thunder far off in the distance. Let the thunderbolt's legacy rest, knowing that its lessons will continue to echo in the minds of those who listen.